Welcome to the Yoga Health Coaching Podcast, a global collaborative conversation about our collective evolution.
We're into the habits for you and the rest of humanity to thrive. You'll hear what's working and what's not on our journeys as coaches, guiding peeps into the habits of thrive. Based on Ayurveda, based on the wisdom of yogis and yoginis, intertwined with the reality of modern life. I was drawing some pictures this morning I wanted to share with you guys and relationship to coaching, and some of the things I think that are they're on the subtler side of understanding that can apply to everything from coaching people in your courses to enrollment conversations to like where do health issues intersect perspective and spirituality, even, and consciousness. That's sort of where I wanted to go for a little bit, and then we can go wherever after that. So, good enough? Is anyone intrigued? Is anyone like, what is she talking about? In the last conversation we had, we were talking a lot about sales and enrollment and helping people access a level of depth, accessing a period, like an experience of potentiality. And it's really important to do that. And I wanted to unpack a little bit today about how people's awareness in general works. Like, unless someone has really developed their consciousness in general, people orient in the linear nature of time, which goes from past to present to future, or that's how it seems to operate. And one of the limitations of this is that if that's your orientation to time, when you're looking from now into the future, it's something like this. The momentum of your past habits is being carried forward. The momentum of what you've done yesterday and the day before and the day before. And think about it right now. Like, think about any habit that's sticky for you right now. It's like the day before, the day before, the day before. And those habits are going forward into today, and then into tomorrow, and then into the next day, and then into the next day, and then into the next day. And that's where personality gets stagnant. It could even be beyond stagnant. It could be even and what is the word for like entropy? Is it like entropic? It becomes worse over time. Essentially, it devolves, regresses rather than progresses. Entropy, not atrophy. So entropy. That's not what we want. So how do we orient? So I'm going to use some language today. I want to just cite my sources here. I'm using some language from Joe Dispenza and some language from Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle just posted a YouTube lecture from a talk he did in London 2 weeks ago. And he talks a lot about space consciousness versus object consciousness. So we're going to talk a little bit about all these things. All right. So Dispenza language around people that are orienting in a different way is from a vision of the future to the now. So now, from the point of now, the orientation is to a clear vision of the future. So that potentiality, the future potentiality, which is my triangle person, which is the triangle is a symbol of change. It's dynamic. It's dynamicism. That's being present now. And what that does is it's fascinating. The more I get into this stuff, the more I realize how much specificity matters. Like the vision of the future needs to be very specific. It needs to be actionable in ways that are specific, in the ways that break down into micro habit. And in the micro habit is a felt sensation. Does that make sense? Like it feels different than the habits of the past feel. And it's interesting. It's going to be fun in a minute when we get more into space consciousness and potentiality. In my experience, you can feel the habit, and it feels really the new habit, the habit of the future, the vision of the future self, of that micro habit. You can feel it, and it changes the vibration in your physiology instantly. Like just the vision of the future of it when it's specific enough. So if you think about whatever I said, whatever habit is sticky, now think of the vision of the future, what you actually want, and get it to a micro habit if you can, something that's specific and actionable. And then either feel the action right now in your body if you can. If it's something, if it's something physical, you can do that. Like it's an alignment thing. If it's an emotion, you can also feel it right now. If it's like you want to feel more of a certain emotion, like joy or something in the future, you can feel that now. And if it's something that you can't act on right now, just still feel the essence of what it might feel like when you act that out, when you do that thing. And for some people right now, I know more and more, there was a question the other day on cellulite on one of the forums, and someone's like, what do you do for cellulite? And I'm like, go deeper into fasting, like let the body metabolize the cells that aren't really functional, right? Aren't really part of functional fat tissue. Because eventually what happens to cellulite is it turns into stretch marks. Isn't that interesting? And then the question is really like, how do I deal with stretch marks? Which is a very different question than how do I deal with cellulite? Because it's metabolized. So say the action, say the micro habit is to experience a deeper fasted state. The feeling sensation that goes with the micro habit, that is the future coming into the present. And then you realize that the future potentiality can be experienced in the now. And that changes the vibration in the now, which changes the present. So that is how I try to help people make decisions in general. What do you want to experience in the future? And I give it a time frame. We talked about this in sales, right? Our last conversation in sales of like, what is that future state by when? So we give it a time frame. We say it's like a year from now. You could say, it's sales, right? Because we're selling something that's a year. And the reason we sell things that are a year is because change takes time. A cycle around the sun, it makes a lot of sense. It's 365 shots, right? It's like 365 times you get to make the future into the now. So if you mess up on like 200 of those times, at least maybe a third of the time, like might be enough. It might be enough to start to gain traction for the next year, Okay, so let's go into space and objects. So object consciousness, space consciousness. So objects, those are my little circles. Space is nothing, it's everything but the circles. And so space consciousness can be harder for some people to experience, particularly from Western education, from like a Western like if you look at science in the West, it's a study of matter. So it's a study of object consciousness. And so for a lot of us, we're in object consciousness without even knowing it. So even like the way we relate, I find this so much with intermittent fasting is people, and when I say people, I'm like talking like the majority of human beings on the planet, right, are going to orient towards fasting and feeding more from the place of feeding than from the place of fasting. Like people are like, what will I eat? As soon as you start talking about detox, the first question that comes up is, what will I eat? Which is so, to me, I've been teaching detox for 20 years, every single year for 20 years. And the number one question is, what will I eat? That's a matter orientation. It's not like, what will I experience? Which is like such a more interesting question in a way, right? Because the thing is if you go back here, right, and you've got the past going into now, going into the future, whatever I ate yesterday is what I'm used to eating. That locks me into the material habits. And eating has everything to do with everything else, right? It has so much to do with how we spend our time. It has so much to do with what emotions we experience, what people we're with, what we buy, right? Because if you bring down like all the things you purchase to a very, very minimum, you're still most likely, unless you're a gardener, living off the land, like farm to table, full on, like unless you are that, like you're buying food, right? So at the very most basic level, it affects how we spend. So what happens with matter consciousness, object consciousness, is that it's really hard to change. It's really hard to become the future desired state from matter consciousness. Why? My Ayurveda people here are going to be like, well, because it's heavy for one. It's heavy. It's stable. It's stagnant. They're going to go right to the gunas, right? Like it is not light, mobile, and mobile means changeable. It's not spacious. or expansive is really the guna, right? It's not expansive. So if it's not mobile or expansive, like how do you create change? So the more, like, I'm just going to pick up my my favorite coffee cup. This thing is made out of steel and plastic. Two substances here, steel and plastic. In matter, consciousness is like steel. It's more like steel than even like plastic, right? We'd all probably agree that if we looked at this thing under a microscope, like one would have more density than the other. The plastic would have less density. So this is what it's like. It's like trying to change steel. Like I could stomp on this thing and the only thing that's going to break is probably my body, because I'll fall off on my butt and break my tailbone or something like that. If I really tried to break the steel, what's going to win? The steel. The steel will win. That's what it's like. That's what matter consciousness is like. And so people may have a vision of this future and they might have it on the vision board and all that. But if their orientation is matter consciousness, where they're just dragging the past into the future, then it's not mobile and it's not expansive. So how are they going to create change? It's so much harder to change. All right. So now that's kind of how I see it, right? Is that object consciousness is a seated present awareness that's seated in the past, and space consciousness. And these are Eckhart, I'm borrowing Eckhart Tolle now, object consciousness, space consciousness. That's him. He put those labels on there. I liked them. I was like, yeah, yep, that works. That works. We can put a bunch of other labels on it, and we'll do that in a second. So space consciousness, which is like being aware of presence. It's being aware of the space between sounds. It's being aware of the fast times between food. It's being aware of sleep and activity. It's being aware of sitting in silence and having oriented thinking as really different things to do. So it's aware, space consciousness is aware of pulsation. So it's awareness that the way the cosmos works is in pulsation. And the pulsation happens right between the space and the matter. And so the matter's malleable. Now, the beauty about space consciousness, like when you're really, and I know all of you have had this experience multiple times, like that's the thing about yoga health coaching, right? Is like there's a place I think in here that many of us have gone on the journey of being a wellness pro because of our interest in our own consciousness, like our own curiosity about like, who am I? Like, what is this thing? What is all this, right? Like, how does the technology work? Like, really? And that brings us into Eastern thought, which brings us a lot more into orientation of space consciousness. When you're and as far as like my little notes on this, like just trying to add some descriptors here. I should maybe reorient. Ooh, sorry. What happened there? Okay. When you're in space consciousness, this is what I was getting to, is you get to experience peace, which in the 10 habits we say is ease. Right? Peace is ease. You just like take off the P and change out the C for an S. And it's like, it's the same experience, that there's a backdrop, and that backdrop of spaciousness that's between everything, right? It's like this, it's between all of the things. It's between all of the matter in the body. We'll talk about this in the body too, because it has a lot to do with interstitial fluid. And any of you who are like very biologically oriented, like my bioscientist types in here, like start thinking about that. Like start writing blog posts about that, because it gets really fascinating. Like it's not just about the cells. It's about the fluidity and communication between the cells. What we know how that happens as someone goes more into a fasted state is that communication improves. Whereas if you go too far into matter, it disintegrates. Same thing is true in the mind, right? When there's too much on the mind, communication breaks down. Communication between cells breaks down. The vibration, not just in the cells, but in the interstitial fluid, right? That carries that vibration of matter, that whatever it is, anxiety, depression, overwhelm, irritability, excess focus, workaholism, like all that, right? It disturbs the vibration. No deep peace, object consciousness. So on one side, we have an awareness of rhythm, and we have an awareness that the origin of the rhythm is happening in space. It happens in the field of space. It arises with space. And rhythm for us, with coaching people in the habits, I've talked for years about, and it really hit me in detox. It hit me teaching the Living Ayurveda course. It's like falling into rhythm. That's where the peace and ease come from. It's not an effort. It's not doing, because doing and action are over an object consciousness. It's a receptivity or a release into a rhythm that's already existing. And this can be one of the hardest things for people to learn, the people you're coaching, for them to learn, because they're so used to needing to do, action oriented, ego action oriented. And doing means they get to be more involved with materialism, which they're entrenched in and trained in, not able to get outside of. And it's the same thing between feeding and fasting, right? It's so much easier for people to focus on their feeding than focus on their fasting. And it's in fasting where apoptosis happens, right? Where cells decide to commit suicide, which is so fascinating. So you see no fear of death. You see what happens on the space side. To me, this is like crazy fascinating. Like, oh, apoptosis, where a cell will commit suicide because it's not functional enough intelligence within the cell or within the cell systems, like the organ system, decides not functional enough to reproduce. So there's no fear of death. When you think about the past year and the pandemic, or as they say in Spanish, pandemia, which to me sounds like hysteria and is kind of interesting, kind of funny to me. So pandemia, how much did fear of death get activated on the level of global consciousness? Like radically changing a lot of people's behaviors in the mental behaviors in their thinking. Like people who were not anxious became anxious. People who are not depressed became depressed. People who drank a certain amount of alcohol, used a certain amount of drugs, started to like up that. So it changed at the level of behavior. And if you look at like, what's the root cause? A lot of people gained weight. Wasn't there the thing like the COVID-20 or something like last summer? There was some sort of, I can't remember what people were calling it, but there was like this whole, like the freshman 15, it was like the COVID-20 or something like that. So do you see how people are orienting from matter, from fear of death? Whereas when we track, well, and this is funny too, right? So if we feed excessively, cells that should be committing suicide, they don't have the space and the time to do it. So they reproduce, right? They replicate with imbalances. And that's how you have the development of disease. So in Ayurveda, that's between stage 3 and stage 4, where all of a sudden you go from quantitative changes in cells to qualitative changes in cells. So excess quantity of doshas, vata, pitta, kapha, the energies. And then all of a sudden you have the qualitative changes in the cell, where the cell doesn't look like the same cell. It doesn't function as the same cells. And that's where you have the development of the disease process. So our little job here on the planet, yoga health coaches, our little job is to help people, right? Like help people get into space consciousness, help people become receptive to being, where they don't need to put something in their senses, essentially, whether it's their eyes, their ears, their mouth. Those are the big ones I find in general. Like those are really the big ones. Eyes, ears, mouth. So all the like picking up of the devices, this is all eyes and ears. Eating too much is all mouth. Pretty simple. And you'd think that, I mean, it's pretty simple, right? Like when we talk about it in this language, it's like big problem, pretty easy, pretty simple solution. And I think the more we think like that, the easier it actually is to help people. And that's really why I wanted to spend a good 20 minutes or whatever today getting into this. Let's look at what happens. I started in the beginning talking a little bit about conditioned personality and the habits and the steel and like how hard it is to change from that. When we have space consciousness, personality gets really fluid. It gets apropos to the moment. Who should I show up as in this moment? given what game I can play in the moment, given what the play is. And the yogis have a lovely word for that lila. And that lila creates that lightness. So everything on the side of space consciousness has a lightness, has a mobility, has an expansiveness, has a fluidity. And at the base of all that is pulsation. And pulsation is constant change. It's constant change. Because there's constant change, there's not actually fear of death, because it's like, well, something's going to happen. Most likely, something else is going to happen. So there's curiosity. The fear, contracted vata, is replaced by expansive vata, which is curiosity with that emotion.
If I had $1 for every time I heard, I don't have the money, I'd be even more of a millionaire. People who become successful and even wealthy find the money to do what they most want. My Find the Money course is a super affordable course on how to find the money for the training and mentorship you want. We created this course at Yoga Healer because I'd rather never hear I don't have the money from someone who wants to take a course from me or do anything else they deeply value. Those who can find the money get what they want in life. Finding the money for what you want is a skill in itself. Skills are not inborn talents. Rather, skills, including skills to find the money for the training and mentorship you want, can be broken into simple steps or behaviors to learn. Yoga Healer's Find the Money course teaches you the step-by-step skills to raise the funds to do what you want to do and to be mentored by who you wish. If you want to check out my Find the Money course, go to yogahealer.com/find-the-money. As a podcast listener, you'll receive 65% off, which brings your investment to only $37. Go to yogahealer.com/find-the-money. I'd like you to find the money for whatever it is you most want to do. This is Kate Stillman with yogahealer.com.
It's Mariko here. So it's your explanation and diagram added another layer of understanding being and becoming.
Yes.
And coming from Eastern tradition, Japanese or Chinese painting, we have a lot of spaces around flowers or bamboo or whatever. And that analogy really resonates with me.
Yeah. Because that's just it, right? Like there's so much we can start to see with like what is the belief system in which we were raised? Some cultures, some indigenous cultures, like they don't give the child a name for a really long time. It's really interesting. Whereas in the West, like people want to name their baby before it's out of the womb. It's really fascinating, right? Like, and that's matter consciousness. It's like I think this has everything to do with sleeping and whatever we do in the day, acting, we'll say, like sleeping and acting, meditating and conscious thinking, and feeding and fasting. It also has everything to do with nose breathing versus mouth breathing. This identification of who am I and what's happening next. When you have a high degree of plasticity and you don't, and this is why in the Yoga Sutras, the kleshas, there's 5 ways we trap ourselves. And like the root of all 5 is avidya. And part of the vidya, right, although it's a separate word, it's a separate klesha, is abhinavesha. It's this fear of death, which is really just fear of change. So when we look at the habits and we look at our cultures, it's really fascinating, like teaching detox for a long time. So many people are afraid of becoming too thin. It's like almost of like disappearing. Like, who will I be if I am in a different body? It's like a root reoccurring issue over time. And I'm so fascinated by that. Instead of just like a surrendering into like, what is the rhythm? Like what happens when the mind is more aware of presence? And in the West, raising a kid in the West, I've discovered like, it's pretty hard to entrain a kid in that experience when culture is pushing to material. It's mind-boggling. Like, how do you entrain to like, who am I today? What are the habits of this person today? And the more we get into that, like that, what Mariko shared of like, we can choose how we respond to anything in our body. Like people around me have been like, why are you so happy? You have a tumor, you have surgery coming up. And I'm like truly overjoyed. Like I have never been so happy in my life, ever. right? And I think it has everything to do with how we are orienting.
Okay, great. So I was fascinated by the relationship to identifying that which is more ethereal and not so tangible, like, but we know it's there, it's present. So, and then thinking about that as far as the senses go too, just taking too much in, and rather than sort of paying attention to maybe the space between our thoughts or the space between the sounds or whatever. And it reminded me of a class that I took a long time ago when I was in college, an art class. And one of the projects that we had to do, and I thought this would be actually kind of fun, maybe with our members or something. But one of them was we went outside. It was just a fun homework assignment. And we had to, I don't know if it was a tree specifically, but I chose a tree. But basically you had to draw the empty space. And what was really cool was what ended up happening is you ended up with a tree on your paper. You actually kind of looked like a tree, but we weren't looking at the branches or the leaves at all. We were looking at all that which wasn't there. And it was just really fascinating how it all came. And there's a really beautiful activity too for the eyes, and just trains us to see what's doesn't seem like it's there, but it is there. So
yeah, that's Melinda in the chat here, negative space drawings.
Okay.
I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah.
Can I share something?
Yeah, Flora.
Just want to let everybody know that my mom joined my bus, and she is straight up kapha, doesn't like change, and her health has really been going downhill. And my sister brought her as a guest. She said, I wanted to see what Flora's doing. And she calls me every Friday after my meetings and asks how the classes go, but she wants nothing to do with it. So my sister said, well, are you ready to do this? Now that you've seen what she does, and you've gone to one of her meetings. And my mom said, why not? And I was floored. So she's walking now, and she stopped walking. She's walking now. She's not eating after 6. She's drinking her hot water. She can't wait to start really meditating. She's on fire. She's 82, and she's just doing way better than everybody else. And the last meeting, she said,
when did she start?
She started about three weeks ago.
Wow.
I know.
I mean, what does that say? You write a blog post on this for YHC Flora, because it's so significant. Because remember how we're talking about perception, we're talking about awareness, we're talking about perspective, we're talking about orientation. And if someone's 82 and they've had the orientation that they can't change for 60 years, and in 3 weeks, they can experience that much change. I mean, it's mind-boggling to their peers.
Yeah. Everyone's just like, I can't believe your mom, how excited and how well she's doing. And she's to eat peanut butter jelly sandwiches like at 10 o'clock at night with her medicine. And I'm like, you can't be doing that. She's just like, I've lived my life. And she's way overweight, high blood pressure. And so we had a small get together for my niece, and my mom always shows up. I mean, it's tradition. And she said, I can't come. And we're like, why not? And she says, well, when I go to the bathroom now, I'm in the bathroom for about an hour, and I use practically a whole roll of toilet paper. I'm not sure. This has been happening now for about a year. And I'm late. She was late to church, and she was, and she said, oh, I want to say something at the end, because, we have our brags in the beginning, but she didn't brag about this until the end. And she said, when I go to the bathroom, she goes, Mija, I'm in there for less than 5 minutes and I'm done. In 3 weeks, her whole digestive tract has been able to get back on track. And now, you know what she said? I can't wait to start getting up early in the morning now, and I'm ready to live.
Wow.
I was like,
let's hear for Flora, everyone.
My mom's ready to live. I mean, she didn't even show up to a family get together and her family is all that matters. Material. That's not my mom.
No. Well, in the 80s, it's not anyone. No one's involved in material at 80, right?
Yeah.
Angie knows that.
So
Right?
then I asked her if she would be willing to go on a road trip with one of the gals in the group that she adores. And she's like, tell her yes.
So it's interesting in there to see how you see how like matter, it was like matter. And she gets more and more embedded in the home, home, less mobile, more stagnant, more heavy. Now, 3 weeks in, like mobile again, curious, outward, expansive.
And ready to live and travel. And she doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Nowhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it's like the part of the mindset with a lot of us in this course, there's a deep understanding of how this works on the levels of body, mind, body, spirit, I'll say, like in relationship to our own bodies and our habits, but not career. There's so much identity evolution that needs to be done with most of you in terms of doing this with your future career. And that has a lot to do with value exchange. It has a lot, how you're earning, who you are, what that personality is, what your group's like, what your impact is like. And you have to apply the same methodology. And that's the rigor. That's the yoga. That is the yoga for yoga health coaches, is the business side. And when we apply it, what happens, it gets really freaking fascinating. It really does. Like, and at first there's fear, right? Because if you look on the material side, it's fear. Ultimately, fear of death. Fear of death of what? Fear of death of the identity of the past, which is more familiar. So with potentiality, we could add here, it's interesting. What's interesting is over here, we can add risk, but it's the safest risk. Why is it the safest risk? I mean, it's really a fascinating thing. I mean, it's the same thing true with feeding and fasting. Like you're going to see it with your members in terms of feeding and fasting. I promise. Like there will ultimately be this this fear of starvation as they start to go to 2 meals a day or something nutty like that. And then with our careers, it can be risk in terms of usually it has to do with exposure, because there's a lot of exposure in space consciousness, because you don't have to protect the identity anymore, so you can expose the identity. You don't have to be rooted in who you were, and so you can be more of an accurate representation of potentiality. And there is risk. I mean, it's risk, but it's like the safest risk in a way, because otherwise you're in conditioned personality, and then you're just pushing the past into the future. We've already been through that, but we could go through the analogy of like what that looks like in terms of career. It looks really safe. It looks like these 1% improvements. The thing about space consciousness is you're more in a radical relationship with time. Oh, I lost my train of thought when I got into my tibia tumor. I was talking about self-massage. So in the last couple, it really started when I had Panchakarma in October down here in Mexico with my buddy Greg Susi. Everyone always wants to know his name. I'll type it in the chat. And I just had that experience. I think a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners in here have had this experience of deep saturation of oil. Like when you get into like, oh my gosh, because you're usually in a pretty fasted state and apoptosis is happening like mad. So cells are committing suicide all the freak over the place. And you experience space on the inside of the body, but it's not vacuous. And this is where it gets really interesting with interstitial fluid, right? It's vibrational. It's not vacuous. The pulsation has a vibration. Peace has a vibration. It's not no thing. Space is not no thing, right? And that's like the tricky part. That's why they call it akasha. Like it has a vibration. So with self-massage, as people are turning food down, as they're turning eyes and ears down, mouth down, turn skin up. Get skin up, 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 up. Feed the skin. And what happens the potency of the vibration within the cells is matching the pulsation of the vibration of the cosmos. See how cosmos is on one side? Yeah. So the vibration of the cosmos, so it has rhythm or sponda. It's essence, meaning it's of the essence of the cosmos, so it's essential. And that becomes the experience on the inside of the body. So it becomes an embodied experience. So this is what I'm talking about. Like what happens when space consciousness becomes an embodied experience, not a conceptual mind experience, a cellularly embodied experience. Yeah. So self-massage is the gateway drug for that bad boy. It has something to do with, it's something like this. Ama, or that which is undigested in mind and body, or partially digested or creating confusion due to excess, is oil soluble. It dissolves with oil. It loosens up with oil. When I learned this, that Ama was oil soluble, I learned this like 20 years ago, and I heard it, and I had like 15 pounds of Ama on me then. So I am speaking from the battlefield of Ama. I had Ama as my first memories. I had Ama as a baby. You look at my baby pictures, 6 by 6 months, I am chock full of Ama. And many of you I know have the same story. Not really breastfed, very invasive birth trauma, maybe not too clean of a in utero experience. My my mom loved to brag that after her OBGYN appointments, they'd go across to, and my parents are amazing people. I totally love them, but like it was different back then in the late 60s, early 70s, Manhattan scene. Yeah, that's my parents. Yeah. And so they'd go from the OB appointment to their favorite restaurant across the street, and they would partay. Yeah. Yeah. If you're wondering why I have excess pitta, that can explain some things about the margarita tequila connection with my in utero experience. So when I learned 20 years ago that Ama, or that which is undigested or poorly digested or getting in the way, is dissolvable or soluble, that's what soluble means, is absorbed and metabolized by oil. It's loosened up. And fat or oil has the vibration of love. It's the same word in Sanskrit. It has the vibration, the sneha, it has the vibration of the connectivity of the cosmos, we'll call it, something like that. Oil it connects things. Like if your skin's dry, it kind of feels like your skin molecules are separated. You rub oil on it, right? And you're like, oh, there's connection. It's like seamlessly becomes in the field of one. And that's space consciousness. All the matters arising in the field of awareness. The field of awareness is connected. It's the interconnected field. When people start rubbing oil on their body a lot, they naturally want to eat less, or they should, right? So it has a direct relationship with the emotional body. Starts to digest some of the emotional Ama. Soon there should be less appetite because the body's digesting more through the skin. And it can start to allow for that fasting time to increase. So this matter consciousness and space consciousness, I hope you all look at it really habit by habit in your coaching and help people orient it from the future vision of themselves. Specifically, this is specifically how I want to look. I'm learning. So in my healing journey process, this is so funny. I'm like learning how I've had roughly 25 years of yogic training and breath training and all that. And I, through a lot of things, through a lot of body work, basically, and detoxing and all the things that we do in here, I'm learning how to breathe in using different muscles of my body, like very, very deep muscles in my body, and orienting a lot of my awareness from just deeper muscles and psoas and all that. And I'm learning now, it's really interesting. So part of like my future identity has a lot to do with the muscles around my waistline, which I'm just discovering, like in a way of, oh my gosh, it's changing how I hold my spine. It's all these things, but I'm very clear on that's what that feels like to have that alignment. So my future self has that automated. My present self is developing the musculature. And that's what it can be like at any habit. When you're coaching with people, you want to get to that level. And I'm just going to keep saying it until we get it, because people will not think about their future in specifics. You'll hear it in your strategy sessions. You're like, where do you want to, how do you want to feel a year from now? Like, joyous. And it's like, okay, great. Like, how will we know when you've arrived? Like, what will have changed? Like, what is exactly what you're orienting towards? And you can do that in your careers, like getting a very clear picture, vision of the future, right? Very clear picture of who is that person? What is their impact with how many people? What are they earning? What are they doing? How do they live? How do they think? How do they eat? How do they organize their day? What are their relationships like? How much time do they take alone? That's the other big space consciousness thing, right? Orienting, right? Alone. Yeah, Aileen, right? Mother of 3. Alone versus with other people. Because when we're with other people, we're taking in a lot. And it can be really easy to get locked into the field of matter, especially with big family meals with alcohol. I'm heading into 3 days of that. Pray for me, everyone. I need you. Thank you. I got this.
Hey, this is Kate Stillman, and thanks for listening to the Yoga Health Coaching Podcast. This is our podcast for Body Thrive coaches and yoga health coaches around the world to learn from each other, to learn from me, to connect and to spread the deep awareness of how to be a better coach, how to lead dynamic groups, and how to get people to results through the habits of yogis. If you like listening and you're not yet in our community, you might go over to our free training at yogahealthcoaching.com/masterclass and sign up for our masterclass that explains to you a bit about this business model that's based on dynamic groups. It's based on getting people to healthier lives faster, to better results in their health and wellness and in their daily thrive faster through understanding the habits of yogis, to automating them and living them in their lives. So that's at yogahealthcoaching.com/masterclass. And in that, it really breaks down the, how to make it work for you if you want to be a coach. And if you're already a yoga health coach, we love you so much. And we'll see you on the next live call. Namaste and have a great day.